Here we are at chapter 20, talking about the rise of the capitalists. Oftentimes these individuals are known as robber barons. So we're going to talk about what they did and why it was important and how it represents capitalism. So we're going to look at 5 different examples of individuals that show signs of capitalism and kind of the benefits that capitalism might provide. So the first individual is Thomas Edison. So Thomas Edison was able to create work on the telegraph and be able to sell his invention to earn some money. With that money, he set up a laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. And from that is where he did his inventions and his innovation to create the light bulb. But it wasn't just a light bulb. It was he created an electrical system. Created General Electric. And so it really allowed him to set up not just an innovation, but be able to capitalize on that innovation. He had many other innovations, the phonograph, which is a recording device, the microphone, electric light. He developed over 1,000 different patents in his lab. And so this is a really good example of innovation, of capitalism, because here is someone who was able to innovate and to capitalize on the returns of his innovations. Another example is Gustavus Swift. So Gustavus Swift grew up in the meatpacking industry. He worked his way up and eventually worked his way into Chicago, working for a meatpacking company. And there he realized the challenge was that the Midwest is a great place to raise cattle, but the East Coast is where they wanted to eat the cattle to be able to process them. So it became very expensive to ship live cattle from the Midwest to the East Coast. And so what he was able to do is he developed a refrigerated rail car. And from that, he was able to really revolutionize this process to be able to grow cattle and other products in the Midwest, other animals, and then to do a meat processing there in Chicago, and then ship the more finished product through these refrigerated cars throughout the East Coast. And this is, again, another great example. Here's someone who worked his way up through this industry, got to know the industry, saw a problem, and was able to solve that problem. These refrigerated rail cars then went international. And Gustavus Swift had an international business that sold rail cars throughout the world, these refrigerated rail cars throughout the world. Another great example is James Buchanan Duke. So this is the man of Duke University fame. And so one thing that's really interesting about him is he was not an innovator. He was not an inventor, but he was able to acquire a license from someone else who had created a machine that would mass produce cigarettes. And so by acquiring that license, he was able to then use his business acumen to mass produce cigarettes. At one point, his company supplied half of the US cigarette market. Now, again, he was able to build immense wealth. And as a result, he was able to donate money, which was the founding of Duke University. Another example is Andrew Carnegie. So his first fortune came from investing in Adams Express. So he invested in a company, and that company became very large. And his dream was at age 35 was to retire and just live a life of education and sophistication. But it didn't happen that way. He partnered with Bessemer to create this new system to produce steel. It was able to produce steel at a much lower cost. And so with the steel production, he was then able to partner with the railroad industry, and he became one of the wealthiest men in America. And so this is a great example, as this is a Scottish immigrant that was a self-made millionaire twice over and was able really to take this partnership and to develop something quite amazing. Another example is John D. Rockefeller. So he founded Standard Oil. And so he started with an oil refinery company in Ohio, and he worked through what we call 2 different types of integration. He worked with horizontal integration. So that's where he owned an oil refinery, and then he merged with other oil refineries to form a larger oil refinery company. So that's what we call of horizontal integration. But he also worked a lot with vertical integration, and that is merging with companies that are along the supply chain. So not only did he form a company and merge with companies that were oil refineries, but he also got into the oil packaging business, the oil transportation business. And so at one point, he owned 90% of the oil refineries and pipelines in the United States. He ended up forming Standard Oil Trust, and this led to the formation of over 200 or trusts in over 200 other industries. But at the apex of his career, his net worth was worth 3 times more than what Jeff Bezos of Amazon's net worth is today. Incredibly wealthy man. So the question is, are these good examples of capitalism? So again, I'll point out some of the great things they've done. And there we're missing somebody. There he is, Andrew Carnegie. So each of these individuals had a great thing. So we have Thomas Edison with his innovation and patents, Gustavus Swift with his innovation and international business, James Duke with his licensing and mass production, Andrew Carnegie with partnership, and we didn't mention his philanthropy. He, of all his wealth, he donated all of it. So Carnegie Mellon, the Carnegie Foundation, all of these things were donated by Andrew Carnegie. And then you have John D. Rockefeller with the horizontal and vertical integration. But with each of these individuals, with these great accomplishments that they achieved through capitalism, there was also some downsides with each of them. So Thomas Edison was well known for exploitation of his workers. So he would, many times, the workers of his laboratory were the ones that came up with the innovations and came up with the inventions, but he would take credit from them. Even Nicholas Tesla, who was an immigrant worker for him, was exploited to some extent. The other is the competition. There's a movie and even about the current wars where Thomas Edison fought against Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla, the AC versus DC currents. And he convinced the death panel to use his competitor's form of electricity to be able to market the campaign that their electricity is so dangerous it can kill people. So this idea of competition, but competition can also come with some really unfair business practices and muckraking, if you will, with the marketing campaigns. Gustavus Swift was really dedicated to creating this industry of the meatpacking. And so as a result, safe working conditions were a major issue. And he was able to really become incredibly wealthy because the working conditions were not up to standard, if you will, of today's standards. And he did so because that was a way for him to save money. James Buchanan Duke. So not only did he get this licensing, but the way that he was able to mass produce a lot of cigarettes is he merged with the 4 other top competitors to form a single company, to form a single provider, a monopoly of cigarette production. And that without any competition, they're able to raise their prices and do really well in terms of making profits, but at the cost of higher costs to the consumers. Andrew Carnegie, the treatment of the workers, specifically the union workers, the Homestead Steel Mill riots led to deaths of individuals, led to breaking up of unions. And so while he argued that he was in favor of unions, there's some really bad examples of treating workers really poorly. And his goal to make profits was to cut costs, and costs oftentimes are in the form of workers' compensation. We talk about John D. Rockefeller. He formed this trust. So a trust is different than merging, because a merging, we're bringing companies together. A trust is we're going to get several companies and we're going to act as if we're one single company. And so this is really designed to eliminate competition. And so John D. Rockefeller was famous for having lower rates with the shipping companies because he owned some of them, and the others he had such large productions, he was able to negotiate much lower prices in order to drive out competitors. And so by forming a trust with many different of his competitors, becoming one conglomerate, they're able to drive out the competition of other emerging companies. As a result, you have the Sherman Antitrust Act, designed to break up trusts. And so when we have this, is Rockefeller spent most of his life trying to maintain this trust of Standard Oil, but eventually antitrust laws were able to break it up. And so the question really to ask for you is, are these good examples of capitalism? Because there's trade-offs, and that's a tough question to answer. And so we'll leave it up to you to answer it.